For months he believed he was forever confined to a wheelchair, cared for with love by his devoted fiancée. But everything changed with a child's innocent whisper. The powder is bad. Doubt turned into discovery, and the discovery revealed a cruel truth hidden within a glass of wine. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. The March sun poured its golden light over the gardens of the mansion in Brentwood. But for Richard Sanders, a 42-year-old businessman, that brightness couldn't penetrate the silk curtains that his fiancée Fiona insisted on keeping closed. For 8 months since the terrible car accident on Pacific Coast Highway, his life had been reduced to these luxurious rooms, the imported wheelchair, and the devoted care of Fiona Morrison, the woman he had met just 3 months before the tragedy. That changed his life forever. Fiona was a dazzling creature. At 35, she possessed a beauty that blended the sophistication of someone who had attended the best universities in Los Angeles with a natural charm that won everyone over. Her brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, framing a face that seemed sculpted by an artist. Her green eyes, always attentive, showed a constant concern for Richard's well-being that deeply moved him. She was the one who organized his medication routine, coordinated physical therapy sessions with the renowned Dr. Henry Battle, and most importantly, she was the one who every night offered him a glass of the special red wine that she said had exceptional medicinal properties. "My love, I brought your recovery wine," Fiona would announce every night at 8 o'clock sharp, delicately holding the baccarat crystal glass that shimmered like liquid ruby against the lamplight. "Dr. Maurice said the antioxidants will accelerate the regeneration of your nerves. You know how concerned I am about your recovery." Richard would drink obediently, blindly trusting the woman who had given up her own career as an architect to care for him full-time. Fiona had transformed the mansion into a veritable rehabilitation center, installing state-of-the-art physiotherapy equipment, hiring the best professionals in Los Angeles, and dedicating every minute of her day to what she called our mission to get you walking again. The months dragged on with a routine that had become almost ritual. Richard would wake up at 7 in the morning, take the vitamin cocktail prepared by Fiona, participate in 2 hours of physical therapy with therapist Carly, eat elaborate meals prepared by the private nutritionist, and spend afternoons reviewing reports from the company that was now managed by his sister Betty. At the end of the day, after a light and nutritious dinner, came the moment for the glass of wine which, according to Fiona, was the most important component of his treatment. "It's a special Argentinian wine, my dear," she would always explain whenever Richard questioned the slightly bitter taste of the drink. "It has medicinal herb extracts that improve blood circulation." Dr. Maurice researched extensively to find this exclusive producer. Richard's trust in Fiona was absolute. She had appeared in his life like a guardian angel when he needed one most. They had met at a charity event for the Children's Foundation 3 months before the accident. Fiona had worked as a volunteer architect on affordable housing projects, and her dedication to the less fortunate had immediately impressed Richard. When the accident happened, she didn't hesitate to drop everything to care for him, even refusing the engagement ring he had tried to give her. "I don't need jewels, Richard," she had said with tears in her eyes. "I just need you well. We'll get married when you're walking again. That will be my greatest gift." Fiona's dedication seemed to know no bounds. She had dismissed all the household staff, claiming she needed absolute privacy for Richard's treatment, keeping only Mrs. Connie, the housekeeper who had worked with the family for 15 years. Fiona personally controlled every aspect of Richard's life, his medications, his meals, his medical visits, his contacts with the outside world. "The doctor said you need to avoid stress, my love," she would justify when limiting visits from friends and family. "Your recovery is our absolute priority. When you're well, we'll have time for everything and everyone." Dr. Henry Battle, the neurologist who was following Richard, had been categorical in his diagnosis: spinal cord injury with little chance of reversal. "Unfortunately, Mr. Sanders, the tests show that the injury was severe. We can work to prevent degeneration, but the possibility of complete recovery is very low," he had explained with the characteristic frankness of great Los Angeles physicians. Richard had received the news with the resignation of someone who had always faced challenges head-on. As a successful businessman, owner of a construction company that had built some of the most important buildings in downtown Los Angeles, he knew that not all battles ended in victory. But having Fiona by his side eased the pain of defeat. The tea. Household routine proceeded with the precision of a Swiss watch. Mrs. Connie arrived at 6 in the morning and left at 2 in the afternoon, always accompanied by her daughter Jasmine, a 9-year-old girl with bright eyes and curly hair tied in colorful braids. The girl was obliged to accompany her mother to work because she attended the local public school in the neighboring district during the afternoon. Jasmine was a peculiar child. Observant and quiet, she always carried a small notebook where she drew and wrote little phrases she had learned at school. While Mrs. Connie cleaned the house, the girl would sit quietly in the living room, coloring her drawings or playing with cloth dolls that her mother had made for her. Richard had grown fond of the girl, who greeted him politely every morning and said goodbye with a shy smile. "Good morning, Mr. Richard," Jasmine would say in her sweet little voice. "Are you feeling better today?" "Yes, I am, little one." "And how was school yesterday?" Jasmine would always respond with enthusiasm, telling him about her classes, her classmates, the drawings she made. It was one of the most enjoyable moments of Richard's day, hearing that child talk about a world he could no longer reach. Fiona, however, did not show the same appreciation for the girl's presence. "Richard, you need to rest, not chat with a child," she would always say whenever she caught the two talking. "Jasmine, go help your mother in the kitchen. Mr. Richard needs to focus on his exercises." The girl would obey immediately, but Richard noticed a different gleam in her eyes, as if she wanted to say something she couldn't express. It was a vague impression, which he attributed to the heightened sensitivity he had developed since the accident. The physical therapy sessions with Carly took place religiously every morning and afternoon. The therapist, a competent professional who graduated from UCLA, worked tirelessly to keep Richard's muscles active, but progress was non-existent. "Mr. Richard, I see that your muscles are responding to stimuli, but something seems to be preventing more significant progress," Carly would comment with concern. "Perhaps we should talk to Dr. Henry about adjusting some medication." Fiona would always intervene in these conversations. "Carly, Dr. Maurice is already taking care of Richard's medication. He specializes in complex cases like this. Let's maintain the current protocol and be patient. Neurological recovery does take time." Dr. Maurice was a name that Richard didn't know personally. According to Fiona, he was a renowned neurologist in Los Angeles who preferred to follow the case from a distance, analyzing tests and prescribing treatments through her. "He treats very important patients and can't expose himself making house calls," Fiona explained, "but I assure you he's following your case closely." The days succeeded one another in a routine that began to weigh on Richard. The feeling of being trapped was not just physical. He felt isolated from the world, dependent on Fiona's goodwill for any contact with the outside. His phones were controlled by her, who answered calls and filtered information. "My love, your sister called, but I told her you were resting. She said the company is doing well and sends her love," was the kind of message he received daily. The businessman who had once led meetings with dozens of people, who had made decisions that moved millions of dollars, now lived in a protective bubble that was beginning to seem excessive to him. But whenever he tried to question it, Fiona would calm him with her genuine affection and touching concern. "Richard, I know it's difficult for you, but you need to trust me. I'm doing everything out of love, everything with your well-being in mind. Soon you'll be walking again and our life will be perfect," she would say, caressing his hair with infinite tenderness. And every night at 8 o'clock sharp came the moment for the special glass of wine. Fiona would bring it with the care of someone handling a precious medicine, always explaining the benefits of that special drink for his recovery. The liquid had a peculiar taste, slightly bitter, which Fiona attributed to the medicinal herbs. Richard would drink without questioning, trusting in the love of that woman who had transformed her life into a mission of care and dedication. It was a rainy Tuesday in April when the perfect routine of the Brentwood mansion began to show its first cracks. Jasmine, as always, had arrived with Mrs. Connie at 6 in the morning, carrying her pink school backpack and the little notebook of drawings that never left her side. The girl had a habit of observing everything around her with a curiosity that went beyond her years, and that day, something different caught her attention. Fiona was preparing Richard's breakfast in the gourmet kitchen when Jasmine, who was playing quietly in the adjoining room, decided to ask for a glass of water. The girl walked barefoot across the marble floor, her steps so light that they weren't heard by Fiona, who was concentrated on her morning tasks. It was then that Jasmine witnessed something that left her deeply disturbed. Fiona was holding a small glass, not the large crystal glass she used every night, but a smaller one, like those the girl used to drink milk. Inside it was a reddish liquid that looked like wine, but what really caught Jasmine's attention was what Fiona did next. She opened a high kitchen cabinet, moved aside some canned goods, and took out a small transparent vial with a white powder. Fiona looked around, checking if she was alone, and then poured a small amount of the powder into the reddish liquid. With a small spoon, she gently stirred until the powder completely dissolved. Afterward, she put the vial back behind the cans, washed the small spoon, and poured the contents of the smaller glass into the large crystal glass, topping it off with more wine from a bottle that was on the counter. Jasmine watched everything, with wide eyes, not understanding exactly what was happening, but feeling that there was something wrong in that sequence of actions. At school, her teacher, Marianne, always told the children never to mix medicines with other things, and never to take anything when they didn't know what it was. The white powder reminded her of the medicines her grandmother took to sleep. "Jasmine, what are you doing there?" Fiona's voice sounded louder than normal, making the girl jump slightly in surprise. I wanted water, Miss Fiona," Jasmine replied in her timid little voice, using the affectionate treatment that Fiona had taught her. "The water is in the refrigerator, dear. Get a glass from the lower cabinet and don't touch anything else, okay?" Fiona tried to smile, but Jasmine noticed that her eyes were different, harder. "Yes, Miss Fiona," the girl replied, quickly getting her glass of water and leaving the kitchen. For the rest of the morning, Jasmine couldn't get that scene out of her head. She had seen Mr. Richard drink wine every night since she began coming to work with her mother. Fiona always said it was a special medicine for him to heal his legs. But if it was medicine, why was she putting that powder in secretly? And why did she hide the vial behind the cans? The girl decided to observe more carefully. Over the following weeks, whenever possible, she paid attention to Fiona's movements around the house. And her suspicions were confirmed. Every morning, when she prepared what she called Richard's morning vitamins, and every night when she prepared the special wine, Fiona repeated the same ritual. She would go to the high cabinet, take out the hidden vial, pour the white powder, stir until dissolved, and put everything away again. Jasmine tried to tell her mother, but Mrs. Connie was always very busy with work. "Honey, don't go making up stories. Miss Fiona is a saint. She takes care of Mr. Richard like nobody else. You need to focus on your studies and stop paying attention to things you shouldn't," Mrs. Connie scolded, not giving much importance to her daughter's words. But Jasmine couldn't forget. At school, during science classes, her teacher, Marianne, had talked about poisons and how some substances could harm people without them realizing it. The girl began to associate Fiona's white powder with the teacher's explanations about dangerous substances. The turning point came on a Thursday morning when Richard seemed particularly downcast. Jasmine noticed that he was paler than usual, and his eyes looked tired. During the physical therapy break, when Carly had gone to get a towel from the bathroom, the girl approached Richard's wheelchair. "Mr. Richard, can I tell you something?" she asked, looking around to make sure they were alone. "Of course, little one, what is it?" Richard smiled at the girl, always willing to hear her childish stories. Jasmine took a deep breath, as she did when she was about to tell the teacher, "Something very important. Mr. Richard, Miss Fiona puts a white powder in your wine. She hides it behind the cans in the kitchen. My teacher said you shouldn't mix powders in other people's medicines." Richard felt a strange chill run down his spine. For a few seconds he was speechless, processing the child's words. Had he understood correctly? Was Jasmine saying that Fiona was putting something in his wine? Jasmine, are you sure about what you saw? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm so as not to frighten the girl. Yes, Mr. Richard. She does it every day, in the morning and at night. The powder looks like my grandma's sleeping medicine. And Miss Fiona always checks if anyone's watching before she puts it in, Jasmine explained, with the seriousness of someone sharing a big secret. And what does this powder look like, Jasmine? It's white, very fine. She only puts a little bit, stirs with a small spoon until it disappears, and then puts the little bottle back behind the cans. I think the powder is making you sick. That's why you're not getting better with your legs, said the girl, with the simple and direct logic of children. Richard felt as if the world had stopped around him. The girl's words echoed in his mind, like a deafening alarm. Fiona putting something hidden in his drink? This was impossible. She loved him, took care of him with absolute dedication, had given up everything for him. But the seriousness in Jasmine's eyes, the richness of detail, in her description, the coherence of the story. Why would a 9-year-old girl invent something so specific? Jasmine, what you're telling me is very serious, said Richard, carefully choosing his words. Are you absolutely certain of what you saw? I am, Mr. Richard. My mom always tells me to tell the truth. I saw her doing it many times. You drink it and get weaker. I think the powder is bad, replied the girl, her large and expressive eyes conveying a sincerity that was impossible to question. At that moment, Carly returned with the towels, and Jasmine quickly moved away, going to play in a corner of the room as if nothing had happened. But for Richard, everything had changed. A seed of doubt had been planted in his mind and was beginning to grow at an alarming rate. For the rest of the day, he couldn't concentrate on anything. Every movement Fiona made was analyzed with new eyes. When she brought his lunch, he discreetly observed if there was anything different in the food. When she prepared his afternoon vitamins, he paid attention to every detail of her gestures, and when the time came for the nightly wine, his heart raced. My love, I brought your special wine, Fiona announced as always, with the same affectionate smile, the same sweet voice. Richard looked at the crystal glass she delicately held. The red liquid shimmered against the light, apparently innocent, but now he couldn't see it with the same eyes. What if Jasmine was right? What if there really was something more than wine in that glass? Fiona, he said, trying to keep his voice normal, I'm feeling a bit nauseous today. I think I'll skip the wine. Fiona's reaction was immediate and intense. Her face contorted into an expression of exaggerated concern. Oh, my love, but you can't skip the wine. It's an essential part of your treatment. Dr. Maurice was very clear about this. If you don't take it, it could delay your recovery. Just for today, Fiona. I promise I'll be back to normal tomorrow, Richard insisted, closely observing his fiancée's reaction. Richard, please, don't do this to me. I've been taking care of you for months, strictly following all the medical guidelines. This wine has unique properties that help regenerate your nerves. One day without it could represent a week's delay in your recovery, she argued, with tears beginning to form in her eyes. The intensity of Fiona's reaction surprised Richard. Why was she so desperate for him to drink the wine? If it was really just a medical issue, one day without the drink shouldn't cause this much distress. But he decided not to confront her directly. He needed time to think, to observe, to understand what was really happening. All right, my love. You're right. Sorry for doubting the treatment, he said, extending his hand to receive the glass. The smile immediately returned to Fiona's face. I knew you'd understand, my love. Everything I do is with your well-being in mind. Soon you'll be walking again and we'll be the happiest couple in the world. Richard brought the glass to his lips, but this time, instead of drinking it all, at once as he always did, he just moistened his lips and pretended to swallow. When Fiona was distracted organizing his medications for the night, he discreetly poured half of the glass's contents into the potted plant next to his chair. Done, I finished, he announced, showing the almost empty glass. Perfect, my love. Now let's rest. Tomorrow will be another day of progress in your treatment, said Fiona, kissing his forehead tenderly before retiring to the bedroom. Richard remained alone in the living room, his mind boiling with contradictory thoughts. Could it be possible that the woman he loved, who had sacrificed everything for him, was deliberately hampering his recovery. The idea seemed absurd, but Jasmine's words continued to echo in his mind. And there was something else. For the first time in months, he didn't feel that deep drowsiness that always overcame him after drinking the wine. Normally, 20 minutes after drinking, he could barely keep his eyes open. That night, he remained, awake until the late hours, thinking about everything that had happened. The following days were ones of intense observation and growing apprehension for Richard. He had developed a careful strategy. During the day, he pretended absolute normality, maintaining the same routine as always, but at night, when he received his special wine, he found discreet ways to dispose of part of the contents. Sometimes he would pour some into the potted plant, other times he would fake a cough and spit into the towel, always careful not to arouse Fiona's suspicions. And the results of this change in behavior were not long in coming. On the third day, for the first time in months, Richard felt a slight tingling in his left leg. Initially, he thought it was his imagination, but the tingling repeated the next day, more intense and lasting. It was as if his body was slowly awakening from a deep sleep. The revelation was both hopeful and terrifying. If his condition was improving when he reduced his wine consumption, it meant that Jasmine was right. Fiona, the woman who claimed to love him above all else, was deliberately hindering his recovery. But why? What reasons could she have for keeping him bound to that chair? Richard decided he needed concrete evidence before taking any action. He developed a plan that he would put into action the following night. He knew every corner of the mansion he had personally designed years before, and he knew that in the guest room there was an antique mirror positioned in such a way that it directly reflected the kitchen counter. If he could position himself adequately and pretend to be asleep, he could observe Fiona preparing his nightly drink. On Friday, Richard executed his plan. After dinner, he asked Fiona to help him transfer to the reclining armchair in the living room, claiming he wanted a change from the wheelchair. He positioned himself strategically so he could see the reflection of the kitchen in the hallway mirror. When Fiona announced she was going to prepare his wine, he closed his eyes and regulated his breathing to appear as if he had dozed off. What he saw through the reflection in the mirror confirmed his worst fears. Fiona followed exactly the ritual described by Jasmine. She opened the high cabinet, took out a small glass vial from behind the canned goods, poured a generous amount of white powder into the wine, stirred with a small spoon until completely dissolved, and put everything back. Each movement was made with the precision of someone who had been repeating the same procedure for a long time. Richard had to control himself not to scream. His fiancée, the woman in whom he had placed absolute trust, was really poisoning him every night. The feeling of betrayal was so intense that he felt nauseated. How could someone capable of such apparent affection and dedication be committing such a vile act? "My love, your special wine," announced Fiona, with the same sweet smile as always, as if she had not just committed a heinous crime. Richard opened his eyes slowly, pretending to be waking from a nap. "Thank you, dear. I think I dozed off a bit," he said, forcing a smile as he received the poisoned glass. That night, he poured the entire contents of the glass into the potted plant when Fiona went to the bathroom, and for the first time in months his sleep was not heavy and artificial. He remained awake for much of the night, planning his next steps. He needed to discover exactly what was being put in the wine. He needed to understand Fiona's motives, and most importantly, he needed to find a way to reverse the damage that substance had caused to his body. On Saturday morning, Richard made a decision that would completely change the course of events. During the break between physical therapy sessions, when Fiona had gone out to shop at the supermarket and Mrs. Connie was busy cleaning the upstairs bedrooms, he approached Jasmine, who was playing quietly in the living room. "Jasmine, do you remember what you told me about the powder that Miss Fiona puts in my wine?" he asked in a low voice. The girl stopped playing and looked at him seriously. "Yes, Mr. Richard. Have you stopped drinking it?" "I'm drinking less," he replied. "Jasmine, I need a very important help from you. Can you show me where this bottle is?" The girl hesitated for a moment, looking around to make sure they were alone. "I can, Mr. Richard, but Miss Fiona can't know. She won't know. It will be our secret." Jasmine guided Richard's wheelchair to the kitchen. With his arms now even stronger from months of physical therapy, he managed to propel himself and reach the high cabinet above the sink. Jasmine climbed on a chair and pointed to the exact location. "It's there, Mr. Richard, behind those corn cans." Richard carefully moved behind the cans and his fingers touched a small glass vial. When he brought it into the light, he felt a chill run through his entire body. It was a small bottle, unlabeled, containing a fine white powder that looked like flour. But there was something even more terrifying. At the bottom of the cabinet, half hidden behind other groceries, was a disposable syringe and some empty glass ampoules. "Jasmine, have you seen these other objects?" he asked, showing the syringe to the girl. "Yes, I have. Miss Fiona sometimes uses it to get the liquid from the small glass vials. My mom uses a similar syringe to give medicine to my little brother when he's sick." Richard put everything back in place, but not before taking a small sample of the white powder, which he carefully wrapped in a piece of bread paper he found in the kitchen. He needed to find out what this substance was. "Jasmine, what we discovered today is very important. You can't tell anyone, not your mother, not Miss Fiona. It could be dangerous, do you understand?" The girl nodded gravely. "I understand, Mr. Richard. It's like when the teacher says not to tell school secrets at home." For the rest of the weekend, Richard maintained a facade of normality, but internally he was developing a plan of action. He needed professional help, but how could he get it without arousing Fiona's suspicions? She controlled all his contacts, answered his phone calls, filtered his communications. The solution came on Monday, when he remembered Dr. Edward Carter, an old friend from college days who was now a toxicologist at General Hospital. Edward had been the valedictorian of his engineering class at USC, and they maintained sporadic contact through social media. If anyone could discreetly analyze the sample of white powder, it would be him. Richard waited for Fiona to leave for her Pilates class, one of the few activities she still maintained from her previous life, and used the landline in the library to call Edward. His friend was surprised by the call but immediately agreed to help when Richard explained that it was a delicate situation involving a potentially toxic substance. "Richard, can you bring the sample here to the hospital? Or do you need me to come there?" asked Edward. "I need you to come, Edward. The situation is decomplicated. I can't leave the house at the moment." "Of course, no problem. I can come over tonight after 8. I'll say I'm a doctor making a social visit. No one will suspect anything." Dr. Edward arrived punctually at 8:15 on Monday night. Fiona received him with her usual cordiality, introducing him as an old college friend of Richard's who had decided to make a friendly visit. During the initial conversation, Edward proved to be a natural actor, talking about the old college days and asking casual questions about Richard's health condition. "Edward, what a pleasure to see a friend after so long," said Richard, warmly shaking the toxicologist's hand. "Fiona, would you mind letting us chat a bit about the old days at USC? You know how these male conversations about football and engineering go." "Of course, my love. I'll prepare some coffee for you," replied Fiona, retreating to the kitchen. As soon as they were alone, Richard quickly told Edward about his situation and handed him the sample of white powder wrapped in bread paper. "Richard, this is very serious. If your suspicions are correct, we're talking about attempted poisoning," murmured Edward, carefully storing the sample in the inner pocket of his jacket. "I'll analyze this today in the hospital laboratory. I have access to mass spectrometry equipment. In 24 hours, I'll have the exact composition. Edward, I also need to know if this substance could have caused permanent damage to my nervous system and if there's any possibility of reversal. We'll find out everything, Richard, but in the meantime, completely stop consuming anything this woman gives you, and documenting everything might be important." Fiona returned with the coffee and the conversation continued for another hour, in casual tones, with Edward saying goodbye naturally like an old friend who had made a social visit. On Tuesday, Richard spent the entire day anxiously waiting for Edward's call. When the phone rang at 7 in the evening, Fiona answered as always, but Edward had prepared for this. Hi, Fiona. This is Edward, Richard's friend who was there yesterday. Can I speak with him briefly? It's about an engineering project we discussed. Fiona passed the phone to Richard with a smile, suspecting nothing. Edward, how was the project? Asked Richard, using the code they had agreed upon. Richard, the project has serious problems. The substance we analyzed is xylazine, a very potent veterinary sedative, mixed with propranolol, a beta blocker. It's an extremely dangerous combination that can cause temporary paralysis, respiratory depression, and neurological damage if used continuously. Richard felt his blood freeze in his veins. Xylazine was a veterinary drug used to sedate large animals. Fiona was literally drugging him with horse tranquilizer. And what about the structural damage to the project? He asked, discreetly referring to the damage to his body. The good news is that the structure may be recoverable if we stop applying the substance immediately. The neurological damage caused by xylazine can be reversible if the treatment is stopped in time. But Richard, you need to get out of this situation urgently. This combination can be lethal in larger doses. When he hung up the phone, Richard was absolutely certain that his life was in mortal danger. Fiona wasn't just delaying his recovery, she was trying to make him permanently dependent on her, and possibly setting the stage for something even worse. The discovery changed everything. Now he knew he wasn't just dealing with a manipulative fiancée, but with a dangerous criminal who had been systematically poisoning him for months. Armed with the devastating information provided by Dr. Edward, Richard knew he needed to act quickly, but with extreme caution. Fiona wasn't just a manipulative woman. She was an experienced criminal who had been systematically poisoning him for months. Any wrong move could put him in even greater danger. On Wednesday morning, Richard made a decision that would definitively change the course of events. He needed legal and investigative help, but how to contact it without arousing suspicion? The answer came through his personal smartphone, which Fiona rarely checked, believing he only used it to play solitaire and read news. Marcus Reed had been the attorney for Richard's construction company for more than a decade. An upright and discreet man specialized in corporate and criminal law, Marcus was one of the few people Richard trusted completely. Through carefully coded text messages, Richard managed to arrange an urgent meeting without arousing suspicion. Marcus, I need you at my house this afternoon. Invent any excuse, company documents, tax issues, whatever is necessary. But it's urgent and extremely confidential, Richard typed in his message. Marcus arrived at 3 in the afternoon, carrying an executive folder and wearing his best suit, as befitted an attorney visiting an important client. Fiona received him cordially, knowing him from previous business transactions. Mr. Reed, what a pleasure to see you again. Richard was so happy when he heard you were coming. He's been missing work, said Fiona with her charming smile. Fiona, dear, you're an angel taking such good care of our Richard. We need to address some company issues that require his signature, replied the attorney with professionalism. When they were alone in the library, Richard wasted no time. In 15 minutes, he reported the entire situation to Marcus. The suspicions raised by Jasmine, his own observations, the discovery of the xylazine bottle, and the results of the toxicological analysis performed by Edward. Marcus listened to everything in silence, making discreet notes. When Richard finished, the attorney remained silent for a few moments, processing the gravity of the situation. Richard, this is attempted qualified homicide. We're talking life imprisonment for her, said Marcus in a low voice. But we need more evidence before involving the police. A hasty investigation could give her time to destroy evidence or flee. What do you suggest? I'll discreetly hire a private investigator. We need to find out more about her past, her motivations if there are other similar cases, and mainly we need to record a confession or catch her in the act. Marcus recommended Robert Silver, a former police detective who had become a private investigator specializing in crimes against property and persons. Robert had an impeccable reputation and advanced technical resources for confidential investigations. On Thursday, Robert discreetly began his investigation into Fiona Morrison's past. What he discovered in the first few days was even more shocking than Richard could have imagined. Fiona was not who she claimed to be. Her real name was Fiona Sanders, and she had a criminal history that included 3 previous relationships with wealthy men, all ended in suspicious circumstances. The first was with a Pasadena businessman, John Charles Matthews, who after a motorcycle accident developed progressive neurological problems and spent 2 years as an invalid before dying from respiratory complications. The second case involved a Riverside farmer, Anthony Graham, who after falling from a horse became paralyzed for a year before his departure due to sudden cardiac arrest. The third was a San Jose industrialist, Paul Henry Coleman, who after a car accident remained in a wheelchair for 18 months before succumbing to multiple organ failure. In all cases, Fiona had appeared in these men's lives a few months before the accidents, always presenting herself as an architect or interior designer, always winning them over with her charm and dedication. After the accidents, she had become the devoted caregiver, controlling medications, treatments, and isolating them socially. All had altered their wills in her favor shortly before dying. "Richard, you are her 4th target," revealed Robert during a secret meeting at Marcus's house. "She's a professional black widow. The pattern is always the same. She conquers wealthy men, waits for accidents or indirectly causes them, becomes indispensable as a caregiver, and then slowly eliminates them to inherit their fortunes." The discovery was devastating. Richard realized that he had narrowly escaped. If it weren't for Jasmine's innocent observation, he would probably be another one of Fiona's macabre statistics. "And why hasn't she eliminated me yet?" asked Richard, trying to understand the perverse logic of the criminal. "Because you're not officially married," explained Robert. "In previous cases, she always waited for the marriage and the testamentary alteration. Also, I discovered that she's facing financial problems. She quickly spent the previous inheritances in unsuccessful investments. She needs you alive longer to ensure the marriage and access to your assets." Marcus complimented the analysis. "This explains why she's been gradually increasing the doses. She wants you completely dependent on her, but needs to keep you alive until she gets legal access to your assets." Robert had obtained even more disturbing information. Fiona had an accomplice, a man named Dr. Maurice Andrews, who was actually a disbarred veterinarian who supplied the toxic substances and falsified medical reports. He was the one who passed himself off as the mysterious neurologist who supposedly monitored Richard's treatment from a distance. "We need to act quickly," warned Robert. "My sources indicate that she's planning to accelerate the timeline. The wedding is scheduled for next month, and there are signs that she intends to significantly increase the doses after the ceremony." The action plan was meticulously crafted. First, Robert would discreetly install recording equipment in the kitchen and living room of the mansion. Second, they would try to obtain a confession from Fiona through a carefully prepared trap. Third, with the evidence in hand, they would call the police for a flagrant arrest. During this period, Richard had to continue pretending absolute normality, which had become psychological torture. Every morning he received Fiona's affectionate kiss. Every night she offered him the poisoned wine with the same angelic smile. Knowing that he was sharing the house with a serial killer required all his willpower not to explode in direct confrontation. What disturbed him most was the perfection of Fiona's representation. She really seemed to love him, cared for him with genuine gestures of affection, cried when he showed he was discouraged. How could someone be so convincing in their evil? The answer came through the psychological report that Robert had commissioned from a specialist in criminal profiles. Fiona was a high-functioning sociopath, capable of simulating emotions and manipulating feelings with frightening mastery. For her, relationships were just commercial transactions, where affection was currency of exchange for obtaining material benefits. "She is not incapable of feeling affection," explained the psychologist during a telephone consultation. "But this affection is always conditioned to personal gains. She genuinely feels pleasure in taking care of you, but only because it represents power and control over your life. It's a distorted form of love that inevitably ends in destruction." Meanwhile, Jasmine continued to be a precious ally. The girl had instinctively understood the gravity of the situation and helped discreetly, observing Fiona's movements and reporting any change in routine. It was through her that Richard discovered that Fiona had begun making mysterious phone calls, always at times when she believed she was alone in the house. "Mr. Richard," Miss Fiona said on the phone that after the wedding it would be easier, reported Jasmine during one of the physical therapy breaks. And she also said that the doctor was going to increase the medicine. The information confirmed Robert's fears. Fiona really was planning to accelerate the process after the wedding. Time was running out, and they needed to act before it was too late. By Friday night, all recording equipment was discreetly installed in the house. Robert had chosen state-of-the-art devices, imperceptible to the naked eye, capable of capturing both audio and video in high definition. The stage was set for the final act of the drama that had been unfolding for months. Richard knew that in the next few hours he would definitely discover if he could escape the clutches of the woman who had won his heart only to systematically destroy it. The battle between blind love and survival was about to reach its terrifying climax. Saturday dawned gray and rainy in Los Angeles, as if the weather itself sensed the storm that was about to break over the Brentwood mansion. Richard awoke with a mixture of anxiety and determination running through his veins. Today would be the day of the final confrontation. Robert, Marcus, and a team from the police department would be positioned discreetly around the house, waiting, savor the exact moment to intervene. The plan was seemingly simple but extremely risky. Richard would pretend to have accidentally discovered the xylazine bottle and confront Fiona, trying to obtain a complete confession that would be recorded by the hidden equipment. If all went well, they would have enough evidence to arrest her. In the act, if something went wrong, Richard could be signing his own death sentence. Throughout the morning, Fiona maintained her usual routine, preparing Richard's special breakfast, organizing his medications, and chatting animatedly about the final preparations for the wedding, which would take place in just 2 weeks. "My love, I received confirmation from the caterer this morning. It's going to be the most beautiful wedding in Brentwood," she said, caressing Richard's hair tenderly. "I can hardly wait to officially be your wife." Richard forced a smile, fighting against the nausea he felt, hearing those affectionate words from a woman who was planning his destruction. "I'm anxious too, dear. It will be the beginning of our life forever." The words had a double meaning that Fiona couldn't perceive. For her, they meant a life of luxury and financial security after eliminating another victim. For Richard, they represented the hope of finally freeing himself from that golden prison and rebuilding his life. During the afternoon, Mrs. Connie and Jasmine worked silently around the house. The girl had been instructed by Richard to stay away from the main living room during the evening, regardless of what she heard. The child's safety was an absolute priority. At 7 in the evening, Fiona began preparations for the special dinner she had promised. "Richard, today I'm going to prepare that pasta you love with Italian wine, a preview of our honeymoon in Rome," she announced from the kitchen. Richard knew this would be the perfect moment. During the preparation of dinner, Fiona would certainly also prepare his nightly wine with the usual dose of xylazine. It was now or never. "Fiona, can you come here for a moment? I want to show you something," he called from the living room. "Coming, my love. Let me just finish seasoning the sauce." When she finally appeared in the living room, drying her hands on her apron, Richard took a deep breath and began the most important performance of his life. "Fiona, this morning, while you were in the shower, I was trying to reach a book in the library and ended up dropping some objects," he began, carefully choosing each word. "Oh, my love, you should have called me. You know I don't like when you exert yourself alone," she replied, approaching with genuine concern. "It was an accident, dear. But when I went to collect the things that fell, I found this." Richard showed the small xylazine bottle that he had, secretly removed from the kitchen during the morning. Fiona's reaction was instantaneous and revealing. Her face paled, her eyes widened, and for a few seconds she was completely speechless. Where did you find that?" she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "It was behind the books on the lower shelf. Fiona, what is this?" "It has your name written on the label," Richard lied, carefully observing every micro-expression on her face. Fiona tried to smile, but the result was a forced and unconvincing grimace. "Oh, it's a medication that Dr. Maurice prescribed for me. I've been very anxious with the wedding preparations, and he said this would help me sleep." "Xylazine. I've never heard of this medication for anxiety," Richard insisted, tightening the siege. It's a new medication imported. Dr. Maurice has access to very advanced treatments that other doctors don't know about," she explained, but her voice trembled slightly. Richard decided to intensify the pressure. "Fiona, I researched xylazine on the internet today. It's a veterinary sedative used on horses and cattle. Why do you have this at home?" Fiona's mask began to crumble. Her eyes became cold and calculating, the artificial sweetness giving way to a hardness Richard had never seen before. "Richard, you shouldn't be messing with things that don't concern you," she said, her voice assuming a dangerously low tone. "Don't concern me? Fiona, we're getting married in 2 weeks. We shouldn't have secrets from each other," he argued, feeling his heart race. Fiona remained silent for long seconds, as if making an important decision. When she finally spoke, it was with a coldness that froze Richard's blood. "All right. Richard, you want to know the truth? The truth is that you will never walk again, not because the accident was too severe, but because I won't allow it." The confession hit Richard like a punch to the stomach, even though he already suspected the reality. Hearing those words from the mouth of the woman who claimed to love him was devastating. "What are you saying, Fiona?" "I'm saying that delicious wine you drink every night doesn't have medicinal properties. It has enough xylazine to keep you dependent on me forever," she continued, her voice becoming increasingly cold. "And after our wedding, the dose will increase significantly." Richard pretended shock and horror, although internally he felt a mixture of fear and satisfaction at obtaining the confession he needed. "Fiona, this is madness. Why would you do such a thing to me?" "Because I love you, Richard. More than any woman has ever loved you," she exploded, her mask of sanity finally falling completely. "But I can't risk you recovering and leaving me for one of those rich girls you met in your previous life. You're sick, Fiona. You need medical help." "I'm not sick," she shouted, completely losing control. "I'm the only person in this world who truly loves you." John Charles didn't understand that. Anthony didn't understand either. Paul Henry was the worst of all. He threatened to leave me when he discovered the truth. The confession was coming out better than Richard had dreamed. Fiona was admitting not only what she was doing to him, but also referencing her previous victims. "Who are John Charles, Anthony, and Paul Henry?" he asked, pretending not to know. "They were men I loved before you. Rich, powerful men who thought they could use me and then discard me. But I showed them what happens when someone underestimates Fiona Sanders." "Sanders? Isn't your last name Morrison?" Fiona laughed, a cold and unpleasant sound. "Fiona Morrison died a long time ago, darling, along with Fiona Smith, Fiona Oliver, and all the other identities I've used over the years. I am who I need to be to get what I want. And what do you want from me?" "I want you, Richard. I want your love, your devotion, your eternal gratitude for taking care of you when no one else would. And I want your fortune, of course," she said with brutal honesty. "After the wedding, when you change your will like all the others did, the xylazine dose will increase until your heart can't take it anymore." Richard felt a chill run through his entire body. "You're planning to kill me?" "I'm planning to free us, my love. When you depart, I'll suffer as the inconsolable widow I am, and then I'll find another man to love with the same devotion," she explained with a frightening calmness. "Fiona, this is pure insanity. You killed 3 men. I freed 3 men from the suffering of living without being able to love me adequately," she corrected. "And I'll do the same for you, dear Richard." At that moment, Fiona went to the kitchen and returned carrying the wineglass already prepared, but this time the amount of liquid was significantly larger than normal. "Tonight, you'll drink a special dose, my love. Dr. Maurice said it's time to accelerate the treatment," she announced, extending the glass to Richard. "I won't drink that, Fiona." "Yes, you will," she said, her voice assuming a threatening tone. "Because if you don't drink voluntarily, I'll have to use other methods. and I guarantee they won't be as gentle as our nightly routine." It was at this exact moment that Robert and the police department team invaded the house. The sound of the front door being broken down echoed through the mansion like a liberating thunder. "Police! Nobody move!" Fiona dropped the glass, which shattered on the marble floor, spilling the poisoned red liquid like a stain of guilt spreading across the floor. Her expression went from shock to fury in a matter of seconds. "Richard, what have you done?" she screamed, trying to lunge at him before being restrained by the officers. "Fiona Sanders, you're under arrest for attempted qualified homicide, poisoning, and suspicion of homicide in 3 other cases," announced Detective Paul Mendez, handcuffs in hand. As they led her away in handcuffs, Fiona shouted obscenities and threats, her mask of sweet and dedicated woman completely undone. "You'll regret this, Richard. Without me, you are nothing. You'll die alone and abandoned." Richard watched that scene with a mixture of relief and sadness, relief at finally being free from the woman who had been trying to systematically destroy him, sadness at realizing that all the love he had felt was based on a cruel and calculated lie. 6 months after Fiona Sanders' arrest, the Brentwood mansion had been completely transformed. What was once a golden captivity disguised as a loving home was now truly a center for recovery and rebirth. Richard Sanders, at 43, was relearning not only to use his legs, but also to trust in life and people again. The physical recovery had been faster than any doctor had dared to predict. Dr. Edward Carter, the toxicologist who had unraveled the mystery of the xylazine, personally monitored Richard's detoxification process. "It's impressive how resilient the human body is when we stop systematically poisoning it," Edward had commented during one of the weekly consultations. "The neurological lesions we initially diagnosed were largely the result of chronic intoxication. With the EPE, complete interruption of xylazine, and an adequate rehabilitation protocol, your recovery has exceeded all expectations." Indeed, Richard had begun to feel tingling in his legs just 1 week after completely stopping consuming the toxic substances. In the 2nd month, he managed to move his toes. In the 3rd, he took his first step supported by parallel bars. Now, 6 months later, he walked with the aid of an elegant cane, more as a precaution than from real necessity. The transformation had not been merely physical. The house that once breathed tension and control now pulsed with genuine life and hope. Richard had removed all unnecessary medical equipment and transformed the rooms into functional and welcoming spaces. The library became a place for reading and reflection again, not a disguised prison. The kitchen, formerly Fiona's exclusive territory and her manipulations, was now commanded by Mrs. Connie, who had become the official housekeeper. Jasmine continued to be a special presence in Richard's life. The girl, now 10 years old and attending 5th grade at a private school in Brentwood, courtesy of Richard, who had insisted on paying for her education, visited the mansion every afternoon. She had become something between an adopted daughter and a recovery companion, celebrating each of Richard's progress as if it were a personal achievement. "Mr. Richard, today you climbed the stairs without holding onto the handrail," exclaimed Jasmine one October afternoon, clapping enthusiastically. "Mrs. Connie said tomorrow you'll be able to run." "Easy there, little one," laughed Richard, sitting beside the girl in the garden he had completely renovated. "Let's take it slow. First, I need to be able to walk normally, then we'll think about running." "I knew you would get better," said Jasmine, with the precocious wisdom that experience had given her. "My teacher says that sometimes children know things that adults don't know. That's why adults need to listen to children." Richard smiled, stroking the girl's hair. Jasmine had become much more than the daughter of the employee who had saved his life. She represented purity, intuition, the courage to speak the truth even when the adults around preferred to ignore it. That's why, when he decided to create the Jasmine Sanders Institute for the Protection of Children in Vulnerable Situations, he didn't hesitate to use the girl's name. "Mr. Richard, why did Miss Fiona do those bad things?" asked Jasmine one afternoon, with the natural curiosity of children who are not afraid to ask difficult questions. Richard had anticipated this conversation and prepared an age-appropriate response. "Sometimes, Jasmine, Some people get sick, in the head, and do bad things thinking they're good things. Miss Fiona was very sick and couldn't see that she was hurting the people she claimed to love. And is she better now? She's in a place where special doctors are trying to help her get better, replied Richard, discreetly referring to the detention center where Fiona awaited trial. Fiona Sanders' trial had become one of the most talked about cases in the Los Angeles media. Robert Silver, the private investigator, had managed to gather irrefutable evidence not only of Richard's poisoning but also of her participation in the suspicious circumstances surrounding the departures of her 3 previous relationships. Dr. Maurice Andrews, the disbarred veterinarian who supplied the toxic substances, had been arrested as an accomplice and cooperated with justice in exchange for a reduced sentence. The revelations of the trial shocked Los Angeles society. Fiona had developed an almost perfect method. She approached wealthy men who had recently been in accidents, won them over with apparently devoted care, isolated them from family and friends, and then slowly poisoned them while awaiting the appropriate moment to inherit their fortunes. 3 men had lost their lives and Richard had escaped by a very narrow margin. Your Honor, the district attorney had said during his final speech, we are facing one of the most calculating and dangerous criminals who has ever passed through this court. Fiona Sanders transformed love into a weapon, care into destruction, trust into death. She represents an imminent danger to society and must be punished with the maximum rigor of the law. Fiona had been sentenced to 45 years in prison for qualified homicide, attempted homicide, fraud and formation of a criminal gang. Throughout the trial, she maintained a posture of misunderstood victim, insisting that everything she had done was out of love. Her lawyers tried to plead mental insanity, but the psychiatric reports were categorical. She was a high-functioning sociopath, fully aware of her actions and their consequences. Richard had appeared in court only once to give his testimony as a victim. Seeing Fiona handcuffed in the dock was a disturbing experience. The woman who had once seemed like a guardian angel to him now showed her true face, cold, calculating, devoid of any genuine remorse. "Richard," she had shouted as he was leaving the court, "you still love me. I know you still love me. One day you'll realize that everything I did was for us." He hadn't turned around, hadn't responded. That woman belonged to the past, to a dark period of his life that had definitely ended. His energy was now focused on the future, on reconstruction, on the life he could finally live fully. The emotional recovery had been more complex than the physical one. Dr. Mary Castle, a psychologist specializing in trauma, saw Richard weekly, helping him process not only the horror of what he had lived through, but also the guilt of having been so completely deceived. "Richard, you were the victim of professional manipulation," Dr. Mary explained during one of the sessions. Fiona spent years studying and perfecting her techniques of seduction and psychological control. There's nothing shameful about having been deceived by someone who dedicated her entire life to developing methods of manipulation. Gradually, Richard had learned to forgive himself for having trusted Fiona. More importantly, he had learned to distinguish between genuine love and emotional manipulation. "True love liberates," Dr. Mary often said. "Manipulation imprisons. Fiona imprisoned you. Now you're free to find the love that truly liberates." And that love had arrived unexpectedly. Dr. Anna Patterson was the neurological physiotherapist who had replaced Carly after the discovery of the fraud in the treatment. A specialist in rehabilitation of spinal cord injuries, Anna had been enchanted not only by Richard's determination, but also by his genuine kindness and his capacity for rebirth after such a traumatic experience. Richard is an example that it's possible to rebuild life after any tragedy, Anna commented to Mrs. Connie while they observed a physical therapy session in the mansion's garden. He transformed suffering into wisdom, trauma into growth. The relationship between them had been born naturally, based on mutual respect, genuine trust, and true admiration. Anna knew Richard's entire story, including the darkest details of his experience with Fiona. But this didn't frighten her. On the contrary, She admired even more the inner strength he had demonstrated to overcome everything. "Anna is different from Miss Fiona," observed Jasmine one afternoon, with the keen perception she had developed after the traumatic events. "She wants you to become strong and independent. Miss Fiona wanted you to become weak and needing her." The girl's observation was perfect. Anna encouraged Richard to recover his autonomy, to resume business, to rebuild his social network. Fiona had done exactly the opposite, systematically isolating him from everything and everyone who could threaten her control. In December, a year after the beginning of the nightmare with Fiona, Richard organized a special party at the mansion. It was simultaneously a celebration of his complete recovery, a thank you to all who had helped him, and the announcement of his engagement to Anna. "Dear friends," he spoke before the guests gathered in the garden, illuminated by soft lights, "exactly 1 year ago I was trapped in a wheelchair, believing that my life was over. Today I'm standing here, literally and figuratively, thanks to true love and the courage of extraordinary people." Richard looked at Jasmine, who was sitting in the front row next to Mrs. Connie, wearing a blue dress that he had specially made for her. "Jasmine, my little heroine, you taught me that sometimes the truth comes from the mouths of children because they haven't yet learned to be afraid to speak what they see. You saved my life with your courage." The girl blushed and smiled, clapping, along with all the guests. "Dr. Edward," continued Richard, "you transformed suspicion into scientific certainty. Robert, you transformed mystery into evidence. Marcus, you transformed despair into justice. All of you were instruments of a liberation. That goes far beyond me." Finally, Richard turned to Anna, who was radiant in an emerald green dress. "And you, my love, taught me that it's possible to love and be loved without fear, without control, without manipulation. You restored my faith in true love." When the couple exchanged engagement rings, it was Jasmine who carried the rings. In a symbolic ceremony that represented the triumph of truth over lies, of genuine love over manipulation, of life over destruction. Months later, when Richard and Anna married in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's chapel, Jasmine was the maid of honor, Mrs. Connie was the special matron of honor, and all who had participated in Richard's liberation were present to witness not just the union of two people, but the definitive victory over the forces that had tried to destroy him. During the honeymoon in Rome, the same city that Fiona had promised as a romantic destination with sinister ulterior motives, Richard finally managed to completely close the dark chapter of his life. Walking through the historic streets of the Eternal City, hand in hand with Anna, he understood that his true life was just beginning. Back in the United States, Richard completely resumed the direction of his construction company, which had prospered under his sister Betty's management during his recovery. But now his projects had a different meaning. Beyond commercial developments, he began to develop affordable housing and community centers, using his personal experience to create spaces that promoted protection and well-being for vulnerable families. The Jasmine Sanders Institute became one of the main child protection organizations in the state of California, offering not just shelter and education for children at risk, but also training for professionals to identify signs of manipulation and abuse. Jasmine, now a teenager, had become a spokesperson for the institution, telling her story to inspire other children to have the courage to speak up when they perceive that something is wrong. Sometimes adults don't believe children because they think we're too small to understand important things, Jasmine would say during her speeches at schools. But I learned that age has nothing to do with the ability to observe and feel when something isn't right. If you see someone doing something wrong to people you love, speak up. Speak to an adult you trust. Speak to a teacher. Speak to someone. You can save a life like I saved one. Richard would attend these speeches with immense pride. The shy girl, who once played quietly while her mother worked, had transformed into a brave and articulate young woman, determined to use her experience to protect others. On a Sunday afternoon, 3 years after his liberation, Richard was in the mansion's garden playing with Sophie, his 2-year-old daughter with Anna, when Jasmine arrived for the weekly lunch that had become a tradition in the family. "Mr. Richard, Sophie is already walking by herself," exclaimed the young girl, lifting the child in her arms. "Soon she'll be running all over the garden like you." Richard smiled, observing the two girls who had marked his life in such different ways. Jasmine had been his salvation when he needed it most. Sophie represented his renewal, the proof that it was possible to completely rebuild life after any tragedy. "Jasmine," he said, "do you remember what you told me that day, so long ago, about the powder in the wine?" "I remember, Mr. Richard. I said I thought it was making you sick. You saved my life with those words. But do you know what was the most important thing I learned from all this?" "What was it?" "I learned that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. A 9-year-old child had more wisdom than all the adults around. That taught me to never underestimate the importance of listening to people, especially those whom society considers too small or too insignificant. To have something relevant to say." Anna joined the group in the garden, bringing a tray with juices and snacks. "And what does that teach us about life, dear?" "It teaches us that true love is recognized by the fruits it produces," replied Richard, embracing his family. "Fiona claimed to love me, but her actions produced dependency, isolation, and destruction. You truly love me, and the fruits of that love are freedom, growth, and full life." As the sun set over Brentwood, painting the sky in golden hues that reflected on the windows of the renovated mansion, Richard contemplated his extraordinary journey. He had passed through the darkest valley a human being can experience, the betrayal of those we trust most, but had emerged stronger, wiser, and infinitely more grateful for life. The last letter he had received from Fiona in prison remained unopened in the drawer of his desk. He felt no need to read her words. That chapter was definitely closed. His energy was focused on the future, on the projects he would develop, on the family he had formed, on the lives he could still positively touch. That night, when Anna offered him a glass of wine to accompany dinner, Richard smiled and accepted, without hesitation. It was an American wine produced in Napa Valley, chosen by Anna at a winery they had visited during a romantic trip. There were no hidden powders, no ulterior motives, no manipulation. It was simply an expression of genuine love, offered by a woman who wished to share a pleasant moment with her husband. "To life," Anna toasted, raising her glass. "To the truth that liberates," replied Richard. "And to brave children who save." "Lost adults," added Jasmine, raising her glass of grape juice. The three toasted under the starry Los Angeles sky, celebrating not just the overcoming of a tragedy, but the construction of a new, genuine, and truly free life. Richard knew that his story could have ended very differently, but the courage of a child, the loyalty of true friends, and the strength of genuine love had rewritten his destiny. And as he observed the stars, he silently thanked for having learned to distinguish between poison disguised as medicine and the true elixir of life, the love that liberates, protects, and strengthens, instead of imprisoning, controlling, and destroying. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Richard, Jasmine, and all those who fought for the truth has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative teaches us that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, from the innocence of a child, from the courage to speak the truth even when no one wants to listen, from the strength to start over after the greatest betrayals. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of human nature, the power of redemption, and the strength of true love. Share your impressions in the comments. Do you believe you would be able to identify signs like those Jasmine perceived? How would it be possible to better protect vulnerable people from predators like Fiona? We await you in the comments and see you in the next story.